The day a woman in a hot pink tracksuit tried to bulldoze my great-grandfather's fence was the day she accidentally discovered she'd been standing on my land for 22 years. And I don't mean metaphorically. I mean her entire HOA clubhouse, their swimming pool, the tennis courts, the bathrooms, the whole proud little suburban empire, sitting squarely on property that belonged to me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the moment the war started. It happened in a stale little meeting room inside the Oakwood Preserve clubhouse, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, folding chairs squeaking whenever someone shifted their weight, the smell of cheap coffee and nervous silence hanging in the air. At the front of the room sat Karen Miller, HOA president, self-appointed queen of beige suburbia. She leaned toward the microphone with the satisfied look of someone about to deliver a public execution. "The board has voted, Mr. Caldwell," she said sweetly. "Your heritage fence violates Covenant 7.4 subsection B regarding unapproved construction materials. You have 30 days to remove it." She paused, savoring the moment. "Otherwise the association will remove it and bill you for demolition plus a $10,000 noncompliance fine." A couple people shifted in their seats. Nobody looked at me. Public humiliation has a strange sound to it, not loud, not dramatic, just quiet discomfort. The thing was, the violation she was talking about wasn't some junk fence. It was a 4-foot-high dry-stack stone wall running 200 feet along the road. My great-grandfather built it in 1922 with his own hands. Fieldstone. Hand-cut. Still standing a century later. And now this woman, whose biggest construction project was probably a 7-layer dip, was threatening to bulldoze it. I stood there for a moment, calm on the outside, storm inside. Then I nodded once. Didn't argue. Didn't yell. Just walked out. Because when someone declares war on you in public, the smartest move isn't to shout. It's to start planning. My name is Frank Caldwell. Sergeant Major, retired, United States Army Corps of Engineers. For 25 years I built things that had to survive the worst conditions imaginable. Bridges in flood zones. Runways in combat zones. Supply bases where failure meant people died. So I learned 2 important things about conflict. First, emotion loses wars. Second, information wins them. When I retired, I came home to 10 acres of woodland my family had owned for over 100 years. North Carolina soil. Quiet. Pine trees. My final project was a modest house I designed myself. Solid, simple, peaceful. But there was one catch. The only road access crossed the edge of a subdivision called Oakwood Preserve. Which meant, legally, I had to join their HOA. I paid the dues. Kept my head down. Figured it was just the cost of peace. That was my first mistake. Because Karen Miller had built her entire personality around enforcing HOA rules. Mailbox flags. Basketball hoops. Trash cans placed 2 hours early. She patrolled the neighborhood in a golf cart like a prison guard. Clipboard in hand. Permanent scowl. And my stone wall, older than her entire subdivision, offended her perfectly beige vision of suburban order. The first violation notice arrived by mail. I responded politely. Included a photo from 1935 showing my grandfather standing beside the wall. Historical documentation. I assumed logic would win. Instead it made Karen furious. So there I was, 30-day demolition order hanging over my head. $10,000 fine waiting behind it. And that's when the engineer inside me stepped aside. And the strategist took over. My wife Sarah knew something was brewing. She didn't tell me to calm down. She just topped off my coffee and asked, "So what's the plan?" Step 1 was reconnaissance. I drove down to the county records office, a dusty building that smelled like old paper and forgotten lawsuits. For 3 straight days I lived in their archives. Deeds. Plat maps. Tax records. Microfilm. I pulled every document tied to my family land back to 1919. Then I pulled every record tied to Oakwood Preserve. The key piece was the subdivision's master plat filed in 1998. Using a light table, I overlaid their map with my family's original survey. And that's when I noticed something odd. The boundary lines didn't quite match. Their survey claimed about 20 feet more land along my northern edge. At first I assumed it was just old surveying versus modern techniques. Magnetic drift. Human error. But I kept digging. Eventually I found a clause in the HOA charter. Their authority only applied to structures built after the association was formed. My stone fence? Built 76 years earlier. Which meant legally. They had no jurisdiction. I organized everything into a neat binder and presented it at the next HOA meeting. Calm. Professional. Airtight. For a moment I saw doubt on the board members' faces. Then Karen hit a button on the speakerphone. "Mr. Davies," she said. The HOA lawyer joined the call. Smooth voice. Corporate tone. He introduced something called a re-engagement precedent. According to him, building my new house somehow reactivated HOA authority over my entire property. Total nonsense. But it sounded official. Karen smirked. "The ruling stands," she said. "You now have 23 days. So I left the meeting defeated on paper. But something else happened that night. Neighbors stopped me in the hallway. An old man fined for a whimsical garden gnome. A young couple waiting 6 months for swing set approval. Karen had been terrorizing the neighborhood for years. That's when I realized. This wasn't just about my fence. It was about a pattern of abuse. And the only way to beat people like that is to prove something they can't argue with. So I ordered a new boundary survey. State-of-the-art GPS. Accurate to within inches. The survey crew arrived a week later. 2 young techs and an old surveyor named Gus. We spent 2 days locating the original iron property pins my great-grandfather had buried a century earlier. Everything matched the historic maps perfectly. Until Gus walked into the HOA common area. He started sweeping a metal detector near the putting green beside the clubhouse. Then he stopped, dug a small hole, and pulled out a rusted iron rod. He stared at it, then looked at me slowly. "Mr. Caldwell, I've triple-checked the coordinates. That's your northeast property marker." I blinked. The clubhouse was 10 feet away. Gus stood up and pointed. "If this marker is correct, then about a third of that building, the pool, the pump house, both tennis courts." He shook his head. "They're on your land." For a second the world tilted sideways. All those maps. That small discrepancy. It wasn't a minor error. The developer had shifted the property line 20 feet during construction, which meant Oakwood Preserve had been occupying roughly 1.2 acres of my land for 22 years. Karen had declared war over my fence. Without realizing, her entire kingdom stood on my property. I called my old friend Dave Jensen, retired colonel, now a property lawyer. He looked at the documents and whistled. "Frank," he said, "this isn't a lawsuit. This is a tactical nuclear strike." So we made a plan. First we filed the GPS survey with the county. Official record. Then we waited. Karen's 30-day demolition deadline approached. And on the final morning, the bulldozers arrived. Flatbed truck, excavator, construction crew. Karen rolled up behind them in her golf cart, wearing that pink tracksuit like a suburban dictator. Neighbors gathered to watch. She announced loudly that I'd be billed $12,000 for demolition plus the fine. I ignored her, walked straight to the foreman, handed him a large envelope. Inside was a cease and desist order, a court injunction, and the new boundary survey. The man read the first page and sighed. "Lady, I can't touch this." Karen grabbed the papers. Her face went pale when she saw the map. The red property line cut straight through the clubhouse, through the pool, through the tennis courts. The clipboard slipped from her hand. That was the moment she realized. She'd been standing on the wrong side of the border the entire time. I turned to the neighbors. "The land your clubhouse sits on, the pool your kids swim in, the tennis courts." I pointed at the building. "They all belong to me." A few seconds later Dave arrived, suit sharp enough to cut glass. He explained the legal situation calmly. 22 years of trespass. Millions invested into improving property they didn't own. The demolition crew quietly packed up and left. Karen stood in the street holding the survey map like it had betrayed her. Within hours the whole neighborhood knew. The HOA held an emergency meeting that night. Packed room, angry residents, and a lawyer admitting my claim was substantially credible, which is legal language for "we are catastrophically screwed." Karen tried blaming everyone else. The developer, the county, the surveyor. But people finally saw the truth. Her obsession with my fence had exposed a massive mistake. A week later she was voted out. The new board came to my house to negotiate. They asked one question. "What do you want?" My terms were simple. They bought the land at market value. My stone wall became a protected historic landmark. HOA rules were rewritten to eliminate petty nonsense. Every fine Karen issued was refunded. And Karen herself had to issue a public apology and resign permanently. They agreed to everything, At the final meeting, Karen stood at the podium reading her apology in a monotone voice. Then she walked out, never came back. A few weeks later, I woke up to the sound of hammers tapping stone. The HOA had hired master stonemasons to restore my great-grandfather's wall. Piece by piece. Carefully. Respectfully. And every time I sit on my porch watching the sun set behind that old line of stone, I'm reminded of something. Power is a funny thing. Some people think it comes from titles, rules, or clipboards. But real power comes from patience, from knowing the ground you stand on, and from making sure the map agrees with you before the fight begins. Because sometimes the smallest battle, like a fence dispute, uncovers something much bigger. And sometimes justice doesn't arrive with noise or drama. Sometimes it shows up quietly, in the form of a survey line that tells the truth. So now I'm curious. If you discovered your HOA's entire clubhouse was built on your land, would you have done what I did? Or would you have taken a different kind of revenge? Tell me what you think, and if you've ever dealt with an HOA nightmare like this one.